Asseyez-vous, vous êtes en sécurité. C'est la 11e édition. Merci à toutes et à tous d'être là. On est un peu plus de 350 là, attendus. Et c'est un grand moment. C'est un grand moment, pas parce que c'est la 11e édition, mais parce qu'on va avoir dans pas longtemps un vrai visionnaire de notre marché. Et on va pouvoir constater avec quelle force et quelle énergie il défend ses positions. Je vais être très rapide parce que pour ceux qui ont la chance d'être bilingues, ils auront le droit à la traduction. Et pour ceux qui ont la chance de ne pas être bilingues, ils auront le droit à mon sourire. Ouais, vous n'avez pas compris, c'est pas grave. Il y a 11 ans, Cisco faisait partie des premiers partenaires de ce qu'on appelait les Assises de la sécurité. Et aujourd'hui, on a globalement l'homme qui représente chez Cisco la vision de la sécurité, mais également Ambika, qui est la personne qui l'accompagne dans le product management. Et tout à l'heure, vous les applaudirez tous les deux. Ce que je voulais vous dire aussi, c'est qu'il est venu spécialement des US pour les Assises. Ça prouve que les Assises ont un peu franchi le clivage des frontières, mais surtout que l'équipe de Cisco France, et Catherine en particulier, je voulais la remercier, mais j'ai eu aussi une pensée pour mon ami Philippe, qui a été un des premiers à parler de sécurité avec moi au sein de Cisco. Je voulais remercier toute l'équipe de Cisco France d'avoir œuvré et permis et à André Cacade et à la vedette que je vais vous demander, parce que pour moi c'est une vraie vedette, d'applaudir très fort dans 1 minute pour lui faire une standing ovation. Thank you very much for Amrika and Tom for coming. We are very honored for this session. Everybody, it's a standing ovation for Amrika and Tom Gillis. Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thanks and good evening. So I'm Tom Gillis, and I run the security group at Cisco. With me is Ambika Gadre, he's our Senior Director of Product Management for the security group at Cisco. And we're very pleased to be here. Now, I will tell you, it was a little uncomfortable talking to my boss and explaining to him that I had needed to fly all the way around the world to Monaco for work. But lo and behold, here we are. So I wanted to share a few observations on what we see happening, and then I'll turn it over to Ambika, who will talk a little bit about how we see some of these technologies actually playing out in real life. And then hopefully we'll have a few minutes for questions at the end. So if you have questions. The other thing that I will ask of you is that as I start to talk, I tend to talk very fast. So you can just remind me, slow down, and I'll slow down. Or if you want me to go faster, you go like this, and I'll go faster. But I'll try to speak slowly so you understand, because my French is terrible. And I trust your English is good. So I've been doing security for about 10 years now. And it's interesting to note the pace of change in security. Always a new threat, always some new technology to counter that threat. And oftentimes that new technology comes in the form of a new box, anti-spam, antivirus, anti-botnet, or a new feature on existing infrastructure. But it's this constant back and forth game of what we call cat and mouse, a two-dimensional dance of action and reaction. But what I think has happened in the last, I'd say 24 months, is we have entered a period of significant change being driven primarily by two major trends in the enterprise. The first is the trend towards the consumerization of the endpoint, the consumer devices coming into the enterprise. And the second is the trend towards the virtualization of the data center. And taken together, these two trends are scrambling the very framework that we've used to build and deploy security solutions for the past 30 years. And so we are at a point in the industry where we can't simply repackage existing security solutions. We need to reimagine them. Because the workplace experience has changed dramatically from what it was even 5 years ago. Remember, 5 years ago, work used to be a place that you would come to. And today, work is something that you do. People don't want to be constrained to a particular device, a particular place, a particular time to do their work, to share information. They want to have the ability to share, to access, share, communicate, collaborate, anytime, anywhere, on any device. And so in large part, this is what they're doing. Whether we like it or not, consumer devices are flooding into the enterprise. IDC predicts that in just 3 years' time, there will be 166 million of these consumer-oriented devices in use in the enterprise. And so just as the personal computer replaced the mainframe, the smartphone and the tablet computer are steadily replacing the PC. And this has profound implications, not just on the technology and the infrastructure, but the way we think about the workplace experience. And I'll touch on that. Now at Cisco, we saw this change coming. And so our own IT team, 3 years ago, enacted an any device policy. So as Cisco employees, we're allowed to choose whatever device we like. An iPad, an Android. You all see the new iPhone 4 announcement yesterday, iPhone 4S, right? It's a big deal. And people want to go out and they want that latest and greatest tool because, as our CIO, Rebecca Jacoby, always says, these devices are like jewelry. It's a fashion item. And so we want to allow people the flexibility to choose whatever device they want. And in the process of running this program over the last 3 years, what we've seen is a significant impact. We've seen a 25% decrease in cost, so it's lower cost for the corporation, and at the same time, a 200% increase in user satisfaction. And it kind of makes sense, right? People want the flexibility to choose whatever tool they want for their whatever job. Especially when you're talking about smartphones, it's a very personal choice. And so giving our users the ability to choose their own tools for accessing corporate information makes people much happier and more flexible and more productive. Now, it's interesting to note that the very similar dynamic is happening not with people, but with machines in the data center. So if you look at the onset of virtualization and cloud computing, what we are effectively doing is we are freeing applications from the underlying infrastructure that holds it down. And it's not at all uncommon, by going through this process, to see a 50% decrease in server footprint, a 30% increase in application performance, and perhaps most significantly, a 95% reduction in the time to provision a new application. At Cisco, in our internal IT processes, it used to take us 8 weeks to spin up and provision a new application in our data center. And so if we need to react suddenly to changing business conditions, there's a holiday surge or some new product comes out, you have to anticipate well in advance what capacity you would need. That process now takes us 8 minutes. Click, click, click. You can provision a whole new set of capacity, and we make the underlying compute infrastructure much more fluid than ever before. And so taken together, these two trends are creating a significant challenge for security because they're fundamentally changing the way we think about the network, and I'll touch on that. But it goes beyond just the security and the IT infrastructure. If you look at what these trends are enabling, smart companies are realizing these trends are liberating our most valuable asset, our people. Right? Today in this economy, the information economy, our business is fueled by ideas. And good ideas come from good people. And giving these people the tools, the ability to express and share information, to access information, to process it anytime, anywhere, in non-traditional manners with non-traditional employees, spanning contractors and partners and channel partners and manufacturers and suppliers, having the ability to flexibly and dynamically share information. This is what Cisco calls the dynamic networked organization. And at the end of the day, what this technology is about, it's about satisfying that basic human need for connectedness. It's something that's in all of us. In fact, at Cisco, we just ran a study of more than 3,000 college-age students. And we asked them some simple questions. We asked them to rank how they view internet access relative to a bunch of other things. And so guess where it came up? 50% of them said internet access is as important to them as air and water, which I think if they ever went without air and water, they might have a different view. But they think it's that important. An astonishing 2/3 of the students said internet access was more important to them than a car. So remember that old dynamic where the kids would say, hey, Dad, can I have the keys to the car? Well, that's been replaced now. They're saying, hey, Dad, can I have the password to the internet? Because that's the most important thing in their world. It's how they communicate with their friends, with their girlfriends, with their teachers, and whatnot. This is the experience that the next generation is growing up with at home, and they're expecting to bring that into the workplace. And so when we, the security community, say, no, we don't allow that, that has a huge cost associated with it. And it all turns out that making employees happy is just half of the equation. Making them more productive and allowing them to use tools that are that fit the way they work makes a more satisfied employee, makes a better workplace experience. It allows us to be better workers, better managers, and better friends. And what's interesting to note is that there is a correlation between happy workers and productive companies. So of Fortune magazine's 100 best companies to work for, they have returned on average 14% per year versus 6% a year for the industry at large. So it turns out that freedom of choice and flexibility is actually good for business. Now, in security, I think you all probably have realized this, that sleek and sexy will always win out over safe but clunky. And there is a revolution taking place on the endpoint, a revolution whose weapon of choice is this. It's the finger. And so with a simple swoosh, users want to be able to access their email, access their enterprise applications, whatever it is they want, anytime, anywhere, from any device. And it's astounding to me the lengths that people will go to work around clunky security measures that they feel are holding them back. So let me ask you all a question, and I want you to be honest with me because we're in Monaco, anything goes, right? So I want you a show of hands. Who here has used webmail to send documents to themselves at home so they could keep working at home? Unsecured webmail, right? Okay, so we got some good honesty here, about half the crowd. It's not at all an uncommon act, but frequently outside of the corporate controls. Now, next question. Who here, show of hands, has ever gone to a cafe and logged on to a random, unsecure Wi-Fi hotspot so that you could get to email and connect to work, right? Come on, we all have at some point or another. We just don't admit it. So here's the final question, and this one's a real stummer. Who here has set up a VPN concentrator in their garage so that they and their buddies could use their iPhones to connect to the corporate network? Anybody? Anybody? Yes, as a Cisco executive, I can't get into details, but I can tell you that we have found more than a few VPN concentrators tucked into people's garages, into their closets, even into outhouses. Okay, we never actually found a VPN concentrator in an outhouse. But you get the idea. If we're taking these tools away from people, these are people that are just trying to do their jobs. They're not hooligans or cyber criminals. They're just people like you and me that realize there's a better way. And so let's embrace that better way. Let's allow them, let's empower our teams to say, go ahead, use your iPhone. Yeah, use Facebook, because we can do it safely. We can do it responsibly when we're thinking proactively about security as a first thought. Now, the reason why we struggle with these changes is because the whole notion of security was built at a time when the workplace experience was very, very different. Remember this old friend? Right? I do. So as an engineer, the day I got off my mainframe and onto a personal computer was one of the happiest days of my professional life, which is incredibly sad, but it's true. The personal computer not only defined my life, it defined an entire 3 decades of IT architecture. If you think about how networking is designed, networking and the whole infrastructure, not just security, but MPLS circuits and backhaul and the way we do routing in our enterprise was all built around the idea of a clearly delineated boundary. So we had on one end, we had an endpoint that was a computer that sat on a desk that was connected by a wire to a port in the wall, and it didn't move that often. And so at the time, IP address was a pretty good proxy for who you were as a user. And you, the corporate IT team, controlled the software running on that computer. And at the other end of the wire, there was this thing that we called the DMZ, demilitarized zone. And this was, for most of our customers, you had maybe 5 DMZ locations. This is the location where your network touches the internet. And so maybe there's 2 in the US, 1 in Europe, 2 in Asia, 5 or 6. but it was a reasonable number of places where you could inject specialized security devices, like a firewall, an IPS system, or a web proxy. And these were the two places where security has always been enforced, at a controlled endpoint that doesn't move that much, and at a clearly defined point that we call the DMZ. And that model for developing security tools has been in existence for 3 decades, 30 years. So we've had a very, very good run. But what has happened in the last, say, 24 months? The endpoint has exploded into 1,000 little pieces where we no longer control the software on that endpoint. Whether we like it or not, you can't control the endpoint. And likewise, with the virtualization of the data center and the adoption of cloud computing, it is getting harder and harder to say, my data resides here. And so what we have is more users accessing more content from more places than ever before. And in a network that no longer has a clearly defined beginning and end point, where does security need to go? Into the middle. We need to inject security in the fabric of the network and have it be independent of the infrastructure underneath. So I don't care whether you're using an iPad or an Android or an iPhone 4S or whatever device you're using, or whether you're using hardened data center servers or whether you're using a cloud provider, security policy needs to be independent of the infrastructure that falls underneath it. And this is the heart of the architecture that we've put together at Cisco that we call SecureX. So the SecureX architecture is built into the fabric of the network, and it's designed to allow you to have security policies that will support the enterprise of the next decade, probably the next century, who knows. It's built on Cisco network infrastructure, the same infrastructure that powers the vast majority of trusted networks around the world. On top of this, we add what we call context-aware enforcement. It's enforcement elements that understand who a user is, what application they're accessing, where they are, what type of device they're using, and when they're accessing this information. It's what I call the who, what, where, when, and how of security. We have a context-aware policy that allows you to simplify policy administration and express a policy using higher-level attributes that more closely match your business requirements. So I'm Tom, and I run security at Cisco. I need to access bookings information. One of my engineers needs to access source code. Now, Tom shouldn't be touching source code, definitely not, and the engineer shouldn't be touching bookings information. That's 4 lines of human language, but that could be 1,000 firewall rules. And so being able to express that policy in a higher level language that is more simple and compact and easy to administer is a tenet of this architecture. We need a next generation endpoint. In the case from Cisco, it's what we call AnyConnect. It's a client that runs on virtually every platform you care about, including the iPhone 4S, right? The Android devices, the Windows mobile devices, the Palm, the Nokia devices, all the, even traditional machines like Windows and desktop laptops, even Linux as a desktop, every major enterprise platform that you care about. And likewise, in the virtual infrastructure, we need a footprint that allows us to have a tether to control our applications as they begin to move and migrate into virtual private and even ultimately into public infrastructure. And this is what we call the Nexus 1000V. It's Cisco's virtual switch, which is embedded into every major hypervisor that you care about. TrustSec is Cisco's packet tagging technology that allows these devices to share contextual information and make better decisions. Our Security Intelligence Operation, SIO, is the brain that helps us identify good traffic from bad traffic. And the whole system is wrapped with APIs that allow us and our partners to build management systems that make it easier and simpler to deploy these new technologies. So I'll show you a demonstration of how this architecture works. Now, I want you to forget everything you know about a traditional firewall or a web proxy or an IPS system. And instead, imagine a next-generation scanning element. And this scanning element has a contextual understanding, so it knows who a user is. In this case, it says, I can recognize that this user is named Reiner. It knows what applications he's using. So it knows the difference between Skype and CNN and Gmail and Salesforce.com. In this case, he's using Gmail. It knows where a user is. So it understands if a user is behind the firewall or not behind the firewall, where they are in the world, and what time is it where they are in the world. And perhaps most importantly, it has an awareness and understanding of devices. So it knows whether it's a managed or unmanaged device. Is it traditional PC? Is it a mobile device? What's the posture of that device? Does it have a pin lock enforced? Does it have encryption in place? And so it allows you to make a more intelligent decision about should I allow this connection or not based on context, the who, what, where, when, and how of security. Now, it's not enough to have this device available only in one place. We need to make that device available in multiple form factors. So we make it available as an appliance that you could put at corporate headquarters. We make the same device available as a software module that will run out in a branch office router in the capillaries of your network, or as an image that runs in the cloud. In any case, the policy enforcement is all the same. And so what this architecture allows us to do is we allow you to have security policy enforcement that is not in 2, 3, or 4 locations around the world, but in 50, 100, 500 locations around the world. You're building a fabric of security enforcement. And what we are effectively doing is we are pushing security enforcement close to the user, wherever the user may be. And this is very similar to what a content delivery network like Akamai did for web pages. Akamai pushed web pages close to the user, wherever the user may be. What we're doing that is in reverse. We are pushing the security enforcement close to the user. And so now, as you can put very intelligent security enforcement in the network, the role of the endpoint becomes to simply find the nearest attach point and connect. Don't try to do enforcement on an endpoint. Running enforcement on an iPad or an Android tablet is very, very heavy and will be very cumbersome. So wherever a user is, if Tom's in London, I turn on my iPad, AnyConnect, which is our next generation endpoint, will find the nearest attach point, which in this case may be a scan-safe data center that Cisco operates. It'll make a seamless connection into that data center, and security policy enforcement happens in the fabric of the network. It doesn't rely on having a heavy agent on every single client. And so from all the end user knows is, it just works. All the time, every time. You no longer have a distinction between being on the network and not on the network. You're always on the network. Wherever you are, you have access to all your files, all your information. You can share information smoothly and seamlessly without thinking about it, without having to log in with tokens or find the nearest attach point. It does that all automatically and makes a seamless end user experience. This at the same time provides better security for you because you have constant enforcement. Now, each one of these scanning elements is built with what we call telemetry information. So we're sending information back to a central database that allows us to analyze traffic patterns and identify good traffic from bad traffic. And because of the size and scale of our business, we have more than 700,000 appliances deployed today that are sending this telemetry information in to our central database. And that allows us to see these much more targeted threats that we're seeing with small populations and small volumes. You need a large sample to capture these targeted threats. What we recently announced is that we have extended the telemetry information to include Cisco AnyConnect, which is Cisco's endpoint, where we have more than 150 million of these clients deployed. So we can now pull data samples from a huge, huge population of devices and clients that allows us to have a very, very accurate view of these new emerging low-volume threats that we're seeing that are attacking most of our customers' networks. So I think you have a sense for how this architecture works. Rather than talk in details more about the technology, I thought it would be best to illustrate this with a story. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Ambika Gadre, who's going to walk you through how this works.
Thank you, Tom. So before I start this story, the thing I wanted to do is introduce you to the character that is at the center of my story. His name is Rainer. Rainer is a top-performing employee at his company. All of you have a Rainer within your company, and you want to make sure that Rainer can get his job done anywhere, anytime, quickly and smoothly. Well, today it's 2:45 in the afternoon. Rainer is at the corporate headquarters in Munich, and he's under the gun. He needs to finish making the changes on his product launch presentation, Then he needs to mail that presentation to his boss and catch his flight to Paris, where he's going to go to a customer launch event and present in front of 200 attendees. Now, the last thing that Rainer needs today are distractions. But there they are. His Facebook friends know that he's going to be in Paris, and they've rallied to command his attention. Want to meet up for drinks in Paris? We are all going to be there. Finally, Rainer gives in and chats them back. Working on a big product launch goes live tomorrow. It's going to blow people away and surprise earnings. Well, thankfully, Cisco SecureX is on the guard. It knows who Rainer is, what application he's using, and the content of his communication, and it blocks that. Even something as simple as a communication that Rainer was making could show up on the front page of the Financial Times. Blushing to himself over his carelessness, Rainer shuts off his Facebook friends and focuses on finishing his presentation. When he's done, he powers down his laptop, throws it in his briefcase along with his other things, and heads downstairs to catch a taxi to get to the airport. But he forgot one thing. He forgot to mail that presentation to his boss. But Rainer's not worried. All he does is he pulls out his iPad, and Cisco's solution that runs on his iPad gives him seamless, secure access to all his files and all of his data. So all he has to do is quickly write up the email, attach the document, and hit send, which he does just as he pulls into the airport. The flight to Paris is uneventful, which is a good thing because he wants to be prepared for the presentation. He gets to the Paris branch office just in time, and he presents everything he's got, which goes off extremely well. The customers love the new product. They like the way Rainer presented it. So pretty happy with himself during a break, he goes off to check his email. And when he's checking his email, he notices a Twitter link, and it's about the situation in Libya. Now, Rainer is a political junkie, so he wants to click on that Twitter link and see what's going on. The Twitter link looks like it's going to a news site, but actually the site that it goes to has parts of it that are dispensing malware. Luckily for him, SecureX is watching again, and it is able to let him go to the site, serving up most of the page as normal while blocking the malware. And the way it does this is all the traffic that Rainer is generating is being redirected by the branch office router to a scanning element in the Cisco security fabric. This is what you heard Tom talk about. And it's able to take care of all the threats and make the experience that Rainer has pretty normal. So Rainer's quite happy. He's up to date on the news, and he moves on with his day. So he had a great success at the product launch presentation, and he decides what he wants to do is actually go down and see his friends at the bistro. Now, he hasn't met his friends for a long time, so when he gets there, he pulls out his iPad and shows them pictures of his children. And then comes that fatal moment. It's a moment that I think most of us here have probably experienced. He puts down his iPad and picks up a glass of Merlot. A lot of wine later and a lot of good laughs later, he leaves the bistro to go back to the office to pick up his suitcase. Well, where is that iPad? Back at the office, Rainer gets onto his laptop and he decides to send a few emails while he's waiting for the taxi. Now, Rainer doesn't know this, but the Cisco SecureX product does. It knows that while he's on his laptop doing email, somebody else is at the bistro actually logging onto his iPad and trying to steal data. The moment Cisco SecureX discovers that there's access happening from two places, it blocks the thief's access and alerts IT. Now, it's only when Rainer gets to the airport and he's standing in the security line at Charles de Gaulle that he realizes what he's left behind. That iPad contained a lot of valuable information. Some of that information was personal, some of that information was for the enterprise, and he's really, really bummed. So he curses under his breath as he gets ready to stand in the security line for a while. Once he gets through security, Rainer calls IT and tells them, look, I've lost my iPad. IT revokes the certificate that's on his iPad, so now that iPad can never get back on the network again. But what IT also is able to do using Cisco SecureX is bring up a report for all the activity that has happened from that iPad over the last 48 hours. And what they're looking for is, has there been any data that has been stolen during that time period? And they find not really. So what IT does is they tell Rainer everything is good, they close the IT ticket, and Rainer says goodbye to his iPad. The next thing Rainer does is catches his flight to Amsterdam to go to another product launch event, which also goes exceedingly well. So hopefully, as I told you the story, you were able to take what Tom laid out from a theoretical perspective about all the different pieces of the SecureX architecture and try and understand and internalize what that architecture can actually do for employees and the enterprise to liberate human capital and top-performing employees that Tom mentioned in his presentation. So let me turn it back to you, Tom, so you can close this out for us.
Great. Thanks, Tom. So, SecureX architecture, at its heart, has a few basic principles. The first, simplified policy administration. The ability to specify a policy based on who a user is, what application they are, what type of device are they using, the who, what, where, when, and how of security. And having scanning and enforcement that understands those attributes and can match it. And some of these next generation scanning elements that understand users, that understand devices, that understand location and awareness. Having a fabric, the ability to deploy these scanning elements, not just in one form factor of appliance, but as an appliance, as a hosted image in one of our 20 data centers around the world, or as a software module running in one of your branch office routers. Having a next generation endpoint, AnyConnect, that acts as the tether for any device into this security fabric. And lastly, having the security intelligence operation, which is the brain that helps us identify good guys from bad guys. These are the major pillars of this architecture, and what allows us to tell you that you can allow your customers and your users to embrace these new technologies and do so with confidence.
And Tom, the one thing I wanted to add as you close us out is a lot of this architecture is something we started working on several years ago. So the journey's been on for almost like 3+ years.
Yes,
and
correct.
So a lot of what we talked about is not just vision in terms of what's coming and what's yet to come. Very large parts of this architecture are available today and you can take advantage of. But making the kind of change that we're trying to make here is going to take several years. So you'll keep seeing new and more things that enable this future for all of us.
Great. Thank you. Now, I realize that I'm standing between you and dinner. So, Jean-Charles, do we want to take time for one or two more questions? What do you think? We have time? Yeah?
And Jean-Charles, why don't you come up?
Yeah,
sure.
N'hésitez pas, ça me fait plaisir d'être sur la scène et de pouvoir traduire la question s'il y en a une.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. I'm Eric Fressinet. I work for the Gendarmerie Nationale in France, law enforcement. Your experience with users using different devices to access your network and,
yes.
and maybe with your customers too.
Mm-hmm.
What does it change for training, especially training on security, because they have different interfaces, different environments? Is it more difficult? How do you deal with this?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So I'll answer it in two ways. First is, one of the things that we do at Cisco, our own IT team is independent of the product teams, and we make them available to talk to customers as much as we possibly can. And so we could probably arrange for you to talk to some of the practitioners that have actually done this. But I will, short answer to your question, a lot of the focus of doing what we call any device policy has gone into building tools that allow users to solve their own problem. And here's a simple way to think about it. We all have computers at home, and we all make them work somehow. right? And so yet when we come into the enterprise, if the enterprise says, this is your black PC, the posture of the user is different. And when that black corporate-issued PC doesn't work, what do? You open a ticket, right? And that ticket's expensive. And they say, oh, gee, Tom, well, did you connect it to the internet? Oh, I didn't connect it. Oh, look at that. Click, I click, click. And then it doesn't work again, and what do? You open another ticket, right? And so in the bring your own device model, it's much more of a self-serve model. We do offer support when there's trouble, but users understand that they need to have, this is their own device. And so there's really good wiki. There's lots of good question and answer. There's provisioning tools where you can load the apps yourself. And this stuff isn't that hard. And so we've had a lot of success. We're talking about a user population of about 60,000 employees and 30,000 contractors. And so the emphasis on IT goes into building these tools rather than answering tickets.
And the other thing, Tom, I think that's worth adding with what Cisco's done is the endeavor is to make security seamless.
Yes.
Because if you take that user experience that people are trying to get with the devices they have, and you change it, and you make it difficult, they're going to find ways to work around it.
Yeah,
so.
I think a key fact there is the next generation VPN client we have, AnyConnect, has a capability that's called always on. And I've been using this for several years now. So I have a MacBook Air, and when I open the MacBook Air, it resumes very, very quickly. And AnyConnect wakes up, finds out where I am, finds the nearest attach point, and just resumes. So you don't have this clunky feeling of like launching the VPN and log in with a token or a password or wherever. Like it just turn it on and it works automatically every time. And so the end user experience is much more seamless than we had in the old model where you're kind of on net or off net, and this is very clear distinction between the two. Yeah. Well, we won't. I know we're probably at time, and you all probably have dinner plans. So thank you very much for your time and attention, and we'll be here at the show and be happy to answer questions personally. Thank you.
Yes, I love